welcome everyone. It looks like we still have a couple trickling in, but we'll go ahead and jump in here and get started. So before we go, I do want to let everybody know we are recording this webinar. We'll make a recording available after we wrap up. Hopefully it'll be within the next day or so, but we will post that to our YouTube channel for you guys to view as you want. And if there's any questions as I go through, please drop them in the Q&A and I'll do my best to answer as I go. But if there is anything left unanswered by the end of the webinar, I'll make sure that answer gets posted, but also we'll follow up as soon as we can with that answer. And all of these slides and documents, anything that I talk about or share today, we'll make sure that's included in the follow-up email once we're through today. You'll get that out in the next day or two at the latest, but hopefully, like I said earlier, we'll get that posted, that email posted to you guys this afternoon at the latest. So be on the lookout for that. And last, if you are new to Teams webinars, we do have an international audience here. And if you would prefer to look at some of the text in your native language, you can translate the slides that you're seeing into several different languages. There's a more ellipses up there you can click on and pick several different options. It does look like, are you all able to view this presentation, or is everybody just hearing me and not seeing what I'm showing? Okay. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and dive in here. With that, today we're going to look at positioning the lower extremities, and this is definitely more of a beginner course. Hopefully, any of you long-standing professionals that we might have attending, hopefully you guys will pick something up here and there as well. But it is definitely geared for more basic information here. So we'll start with a review of those basics, kind of get why it's important to get those lower extremities correctly positioned, some of the basic goals of positioning those lower extremities, and then we'll kind of take a look at a quick look anyway of some of the variety of options we have and solutions we have for getting those legs positioned, and then kind of put it all together with a few example applications. So what do we need to know about positioning those lower extremities? That's the first question we want to ask, right? We'll start by asking, why is this so important? When we talk about positioning the lower extremities or any body part, we all hopefully by now know that the pelvis is our base of support when we're seated. Its position is going to affect the position of lower extremities, and it becomes the foundation for positioning the spine, upper extremities, the head, right? But it works in opposite as well, right? So the lower extremities can impact the position of the pelvis. So you can't really get one in the optimal position without the other being the optimal position as well. So they are very interconnected, and just with any other body segment, when we're at the lower extremities, when those are positioned or well positioned, they should also be well protected from injury and hopefully in many cases further deterioration of that posture. So hopefully we're achieving those goals, keeping that person safe and keeping them well positioned. So to that end, even well-designed and well-fitted wheelchairs can be risky if that user's feet are in the wrong spot on the foot plates, they're not secured. If we see uneven pressure distribution on the seated surfaces, we see that our user may be constantly looking to see if their feet are where they need to be, and if they're doing that, that can really distract from safe and independent operation of that equipment. We'll see increased caregiver involvement as well, right? They have to be down there fixing the feet and putting them back on the foot plate constantly and things like that. And there's also a big push recently to mitigate the risk of a user's foot falling off that foot plate, right? When that occurs, you open the door to just a wide variety of potentially serious injuries, and pretty ugly things can happen there. So I do know of a big push there, even down into like looking at ways sensors can be involved to alert somebody. So safety is a big key thing here when we're talking about positioning those lower extremities. We do always want to keep that in mind. As far as function goes, when we talk about function in the wheelchair, the user's function, the pelvis, again, provides that foundation for stability. It's more obvious that pelvic position affects spinal positioning, which then in turn supports the limbs, the upper limbs. But as I mentioned early on, that pelvic position and lower extremity positioning are interconnected, right? So when we're positioning somebody, we should always work from the pelvis down, right? If the pelvis is not kept in optimal alignment, you end up with poor joint and muscle function. You've got potential injury. You've got pain in the spine. And for the purpose of this webinar, you get pain in the lower extremities. But we have to consider the force and equally the opposing forces when we're trying to correct a position. So sometimes that opposing force can do more harm than good, and it's best to just let that limb go where it wants to be, and find the way to support it in that place. So all that to say, good positioning and support for the pelvis, the lower extremity, spines, limbs, all of that, all the way up to the head is needed for optimal function for the user. We can't just look at positioning those lower extremities or really any body segment in isolation. And I think that's easy to forget sometimes. It's often something like you get so focused on that one major problem, we kind of forget to look at the whole sometimes. So we always want to remember that when we're looking. So in a perfect world, we would have our legs positioned so that there's really no abduction, no adduction, no rotation of the femurs. The knees are around 90 degrees, right? But that old like 90 is just not realistic. So we need to find that optimal alignment for each individual. There's just no cookie cutter approach here. To start, we have to remember that old fixed versus flexible or reducible versus non-reducible question. If the posture in the legs is flexible or reducible, then sure, we can work on correcting that positioning as much as they can tolerate. But if they have a fixed posture or non-reducible posture, then we need to find ways to accommodate that posture and prevent migration, further migration, provide what comfort we can, right? So two easy examples of this is when we talk about lower extremities are tight hamstrings or fixed knee extensions, right? So tight hamstrings, those can lead to a posterior pelvic tilt. If we're pulling the legs all the way to 90, that's also going to pull the pelvis into that posterior pelvic tilt. And there's just no way we would see legs at 90 degrees on an individual whose knee angle is fixed in some degree of extension, for example. So neither of those users would have that hypothetical 90-degree angle that we're looking for. So keep in mind, like, while 90 degrees is our generalized global recommendation that everybody says in text and in research, but I think we all know in real life, 90 degrees is hard to find a lot of times. Same goes for the feet. The feet should be around 90 degrees as well, but again, that's often not possible. If that user has extremely limited range of motion in the ankles, 90 degrees may just be impossible. So you'd want a foot plate that can account for that limited range of motion. It may need to be angle adjustable to meet their, like, say, plantar flexion. It may need to be medially or laterally rotated to match what their neutral foot position is as well. So foot plate height is also extremely important here. Too low and you can cut off circulation in the back of the legs. Too high, you put excessive pressure on the ITs, and then you get increased potential for pressure injury in both scenarios. If the user or individual is using their equipment both with and without shoes, for extended periods of time in each scenarios, that can get very tricky, right? Especially when we talk about shoes that are really thick soles. So foot plate height is critical. There's always going to be some challenges there, but we just really want to shoot for that happy median when there's varying usages, right, of shoes, AFOs, orthotics, things like that. We want to find that happy spot for all of it. So I do know there's a lot of text on this slide, but rather than recite all this to you, I just want to take a minute to talk about retained primitive reflexes. It happens far too often that seating systems trigger those primitive reflexes. And ultimately, that's going to inhibit that user's ability to be safe and independent, right? I think we tend to consider retained reflexes in context of head positioning or, say, ATNR or STNR. And those reflexes are at work in lower extremities as well. We have to respect them when we consider our interventions on seating, down on the legs and the feet, right? Especially when we're talking pediatrics, where those reflexes might not have been integrated yet. So it's important to remember that some of these may not start down by the feet, but they still involve the feet. So if we take STNR, for example, that reflex is in response to a stimulus at the head, but movement down in the lower extremities is involved in that reflex. So considering the primitive reflexes during our evaluations for equipment, it's just as important here when we look at the lower extremities as with any other body segment. And so a quick summary of all that. So the goal here of foot positioning, we want to use the least amount of support that still allows that user to achieve that desired outcome, but we want to be safe, right? Safety is another key consideration, especially with increased muscle tone, spasticity. We need to ensure that user's foot or feet remain securely on that foot plate, and we're preventing any risk of injury or migration while we're in that wheelchair. When we are evaluating for lower extremity positioning options, we really need to consider several factors. Do they require their feet to be relatively locked in place to provide a stable base of support that can improve their trunk and upper extremity, head position, neck function, things like that? Or do they need some degree of freedom of movement in their lower extremities so they can use their tonal patterns to find stability and isolate their movements for better control? If the user loses their ability to stabilize themselves in their seating system, it might compromise their ability to safely and independently operate the equipment. So there's just some key things to think about when we're selecting those positioning solutions for the lower extremities. It's always important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. The optimal positioning is going to vary from person to person. It'll always depend on that individual's goals and needs in that seating system. So shifting focus now, we'll take a few minutes to look at some of the solutions we can use to position lower extremities and help achieve some of those seating goals for that user. First up, we have the leg harness. So these are made of a dynamic material. They're attached to the rear of the frame and kind of wrap up and over the leg and then back under the inner thigh and connect to the front of the frame. So that direction of pull with wrapping around like that helps hold the user back in the chair and makes this a great option for individuals who tend to slide forward, maybe due to some spastic thrusting, things like that. But they also provide some resistance to a pelvic rotation. So these leg harnesses can be used with or without a pelvic belt. And for users who might need some assistance, but we need to avoid pressure on the bladder, for example, these are a great solution. But one tip here is that these can be used to address hip adduction as well. So if you place those straps a little bit more towards the knees, especially from how I have them pictured in these images here, slide them a little bit more towards the knees, the leg harness can help those legs stay in more of a neutral alignment with the hips. And keep in mind that with the leg harnesses, they're used to position each leg individually, so they don't necessarily need to be perfectly symmetrical like shown here. You can have one slightly more forward than the other, things like that. You're there to achieve that goal on both sides and not just one, right? Medial thigh supports are designed to help limit the amount of hip adduction or how much the person's legs come together, not for keeping the hips back in the seat, right? This is not a weight bearing device. The groin is not a weight bearing surface. We don't want to have we don't want to have somebody sliding into that. So we want to make sure we have those other strategies for keeping hips and back in the chair. In some users with fixed position, these can be used to prevent tightness or contractures, protect the skin, things like that. And we have a variety of hardwares to choose from. So hopefully that means that we can fit just about any application. We have simple, fixed, removable hardware all the way up to super adjustable link style hardware. So um, hopefully with these two, you can get it on the chair you're working with and put that pad just about anywhere it needs to be. And speaking of pads, we have several common shapes of pads here, different sizes of each one to really individualize the fit for that user. But I do want to mention and take a little bit of time to talk about that adjustable pad that we have here down on the bottom of that image. So the left and right side of the pads are independently adjustable, so you can open and close that angle as needed. But one of the really cool things is that they're also independently depth adjustable. So for your user with a leg length discrepancy and adduction, you can adjust to accommodate for that rather than using one solid pad and trying to find the sweet spot for both sides. These same adjustable pads here, we can use those to embed switches or add, say, the sensor from a head array, right? For users who might lack some function in the upper body, but they still have decent control of those lower extremities and are able to operate a chair with them, right? So think like bulbar onset ALS is one I think of. So we can do some cool things with those style pads there. To accommodate for hip abduction, abduction, we have lateral knee supports or knee adductors. The goal with these are really to help support that neutral alignment and normalize that pressure distribution as best as possible. They're also great to help avoid contact with, say, a leg rest on those tubes with the leg supports, right? So positioning of that pad to maximize the contact on the knee can be key here for comfort. So all of the hardwares we offer do have pads that swivel in multiple planes from multiple directions. We also want to try to minimize the width added to the chair. We don't want to make the chair any wider than it has to be, right? So we want to be careful when we do that and cautious on how we attach that hardware. We do have cane and track mounted options to fit most chairs here, and we have 3 and 4 inch round pads. We could do larger curved pads that can kind of come more anterior and cup the knee. And these can also be used to embed switches, just like I mentioned earlier, or sensors from a head array. So again, for those users who lack the function in the upper body, but still have it in the lower body, they could still control a power chair, for example, with these hardwares. On the residual limb supports, this is really designed to provide that support and comfort for below the knee amputees by preventing those contractures, reducing edema, just kind of giving overall patient comfort, right? The hardware is simple to adjust. It allows the pad to be angled and re-angled in a couple of planes here to meet that user's functional needs at any given time. We also have a slightly contoured top edge here to help keep that limb centered. But since individuals with below the knee amputations typically have full contact over the buttocks and posterior thighs, but maybe lack weight bearing on one side or one foot or both feet, it's pretty crucial to ensure like the adequate overall pressure distribution is met here. So These can be used to help normalize that pressure distribution when one side's a lot heavier than the other. We offer this in both a cane mount and a track mount option. So this track mount here is just a simple, effective choice for power chairs, certain manual chairs with track systems, but the cane mount as well. The cane mount is removable, and that can be very helpful, not just for transfers, but when that user alternates between wearing a prosthetic limb or not wearing it, that removable option lets them easily add the support to that leg rest as they need it, or remove it, right? Depending on the scenario there. On the calf support side, in general, these are meant to just help keep the feet safely positioned on the foot plates. In some cases, especially manual chairs, calf supports and straps really can be used posteriorly to help prevent or account for a flexible knee flexion. Some calf supports, like the straps, can also be applied anteriorly to accommodate for a flexible knee extension. So that would be maybe an alternative to strapping on the feet or ankles. So there are a variety of calf support options to choose from. At Stealth here, we have traditional pads and straps, the straps like you see here. These are structured materials, so they don't really give too much once they're installed. They stay pretty rigid, but the straps are shorter in overall profile versus the panels. And since those straps are a little bit smaller, you can really get precise with the placement here. The calf panel is essentially the size of two straps stacked on top of each other. And this really meant to just distribute that load over a broader surface area. We have a variety of custom straps that we make as well. We can do them in a thick neoprene material for a little bit more give, but these would essentially serve the same function as those other two straps we just saw. And we have custom calf pads, which have a solid base of either wood or ABS, and they're going to have T-nuts so that they could attach to, say, OEM style calf support hardware without having to do much tricks and workarounds to get it installed on the chair. So it'll install without much trouble. And then last, we do have some calf pad covers. These are padded covers for, right now, the Quantum power chairs. And these will just add a little bit of padding to those molded calf pads. They're going to be a wipeable cover for easy cleaning. They come on and off really easy, but they do add a little bit more padding for somebody who's got some sensitivity there in that area. When we look at superior foot supports, these have been designed to maintain that foot plate position or foot positioning over the foot plate, as well as hopefully limit some of that knee extension and in turn protect the foot from pressure injuries and help normalize that pressure distribution on the seated surface. So to use the least amount of support possible in the name of that goal, we'll start here with the toe strap. Toe straps are a great option when you're looking to only minimize only use a minimal amount of support. And keeping those feet over the foot plate, right? So I've seen toe straps used on the lateral side, where the lateral side is mounted pretty far forward and the medial side is a little bit more rearward to help minimize some mild rotations. So you can get kind of creative here. And at Stealth, we always include a pad on our foot supports and toe straps. We want to make them more comfortable for the user, right? That's one of our main goals as seating providers, is to provide comfort. So we want it to be comfortable. But what we have seen time and again is that when there's a pad present, there's a lot better of a chance that the caregivers are more likely to fully tighten that strap down, which goes for almost any strap, not just toe straps here like we're looking at. But there's a little better compliance just by having a pad often. So we also use curved buckles. We don't want anything digging in, so our buckles here, especially on the foot supports, are always curved. But when toe straps aren't enough, we move up to the circumferential supports that wrap around the ankle. And these are really going to be designed to distribute pressure evenly for clients who may push really hard against a toe strap, for example, or maybe they need a little bit more freedom to move around. So these tuck under the pant legs as well, under most pant legs, I should say. So they are a pretty discreet support option. They do allow that foot to move to a certain degree, and you can wear them with or without shoes. So for users who need to keep their feet over foot plates, these will work very well. That foot can wiggle around and rotate and things like that. And the fixed ankle support here that we're looking at is made of a structured and rigid material. You've got side release or a Velcro closure option so that most users are able to get in and out of them without having to have help. And it attaches with just a normal footman's loop that would bolt down to the foot plate. So our fixed ankle support and our ankle positioning system are very, very similar. The ankle positioning system here is going to include an ABS foot plate to make mounting on certain foot plates a little easier, make it easier to achieve maybe a rotated position on that when, say, that stock foot plate doesn't allow for it. One of the key differences in that support, though, is that the material is now dynamic, where the previous was structured. So this dynamic material can allow a little bit more freedom of movement, but that doesn't mean we've included a heel loop to help control that extra movement if needed. And then last here we have the full foot positioner. So that's going to combine that ankle positioning system with a toe strap. So you get all the benefits of the ankle positioning system, but now you're also positioning that forefoot a little bit more. So when somebody needs a little bit more support than ankle strapping and toe strapping provides, we do have the shoe holder. So this one is going to be a rigid support that's going to bolt to the foot plate. And once it's installed, that client really can't rotate or move their feet side to side, back and forth, things like that. So considering everything is snug, the feet are pretty well locked in place. So when that foot placement is critical or movement needs to be limited, shoe holders will do that. These can be added to foot plates at different angles, different depths from each other, and really meet those goals for that particular user. Our shoe holder uses a higher lateral wall, so that really helps maintain that foot position and not just the position of, say, the sole of a shoe. And because of that, we've included a pretty large Achilles cutout. We want to make sure that there's no contact in the event that you're having to plantar flex your foot plate. Or maybe we have a lot of clients whose Achilles tendons are just very prominent. We don't want any contact there. So that's why we have that giant relief there on the back side of that shoe holder. So the rear strap is also angled. It hopefully helps prevent it from digging into the top of the foot or ankle as easily as it could be if it were just a flat strap. And both straps are attached to the sides of the shoe holder rather than wrapping underneath. So there's no webbing running underneath that shoe holder, typically directly under the bolt holes that you're trying to use to attach it. And everything's padded with curved buckles on those straps. So remember, if the client wears AFOs, there's a good chance that they could be using their chair with shoes, with regular fitting shoes, without shoes, with AFOs, or with very large shoes that fit over those AFOs, right? So you've got a wide variety of sizes that you might be trying to hit there with that client. So we really want to just focus on getting the shoe holder to fit the largest shoes that they're going to be wearing. And that may not always be the same on one side versus the other, right? They may only have an AFO on, say, the right side, but not the left. So we just kind of want to keep that in mind. If there's any orthotics present, the size of that support may need to be very, very carefully considered. Padded foot supports can help users who sit in their chair for long periods of time, maybe without shoes, though. So they provide padding that can make that foot plate more comfortable, help protect against some pressure injuries. But remember our reflexes from earlier, right? If that user has a retained flexor withdrawal, for example, the pressure on the ball of the foot could cause a response, right? And so adding a padded surface could actually increase that input compared to just a flat surface that doesn't give. So that could likely equal more frequent responses. It may not. It's tough to say without looking at a particular individual, but just keep that in mind. Um, so here we have our padded foot plate, and this can come with medium density foam. So that'll give you some good support, but also some give in cushioning. We don't want it to bottom out, and typically it's going to come with an abrasion-resistant leatherette vinyl. So it'll hold up pretty well to somebody's feet and them constantly moving around. It's also wipeable and cleanable. But we do have some custom options. So you could do, say, a neoprene. Hopefully this picture is coming out okay here. But we do have a neoprene version like this one for a little bit more softer feel. And we do have slip-on gel footplate covers for the quantum footplates. These will come with a 1 centimeter thick gel that does not bottom out or lose its form over time. These also come with a wipeable cover and slip-on Velcro for those quantum footplates, so they're pretty simple to use and install. And for those of you who are wondering who know quantums pretty well, we will have an updated shape of these covers for the new footplate designs ready pretty soon, hopefully within the next couple of months or so. And then next, we have foot boxes. These contain that user's foot or feet and can still allow for some movement, right? All of the surfaces are going to be padded, so if the user is sensitive to contact with leg rests, for example, this can help. You'll have a padded surface that helps hopefully distribute the load a lot more than say resting against a leg rest tube would. And they come with again an easily wipeable vinyl material. You've got 3/16 inch of foam inside of there, so it's a fairly thick foam for the application. And you can do these as a double, so they'll span both feet, or a single. So when that foot plate needs to be able to swing away, the singles allow for that. But keep in mind, these do tend to be a bit heavy, so they will add some weight to the chair, but our typical users who use these style of foot boxes are often in dependent mobility solutions, so that weight isn't really that critical. But we've also done some interesting things here with the foot boxes, like add switches or include a joystick for foot driving. So we could do some fun things with these foot boxes if needed. Padded foot supports are going to be similar to the foot box, except that these are soft, and there's really not an ABS outer shell, right? Like the previous foot boxes we just looked at. These are really meant more for protecting the feet and the lower extremities from coming into contact with that hard surface and them experiencing any discomfort or injury. They shouldn't really be used as the only intervention for somebody who might need their lower extremities to be better positioned, or maybe somebody who has increased tone, things like that. Just like with the foot boxes, there's a single for users who need support on only one side, or maybe that leg rest, both leg rests need to swing away for some reason. But we also have a double, and a double with a divider like you see here in the image. Each one comes in a short and a tall. The one pictured is a tall, and the short is about half as high as that. Now, we have a wipeable contact surface again for easy cleaning, but we also have an anti-skid surface on the top of the foot plate to help keep those feet from sliding around. Once these are on there, we do expect a lot of the users to use them without shoes. So sometimes vinyl, if your user's feet are sweaty, vinyl gets pretty slippery. So on these, we've designed them so that the inner support for the upper section can be pulled out. The plastic support inside of there can be removed, and you can hit the top corners of that with, say, a heat gun to flare them out. And when you flare that top corner out, um, and I should point out here, I'm talking this area right here of the support. When you are able to flare that out, it can help avoid some of the unwanted contact when you're transferring into your chair. So now let's take another deviation here. We're going to look at some applications. I won't go too in depth on these, but I just wanted to show some of these things I'm talking about in action here. So here we have a couple of young CP users, and one of the things that we want to watch out for is that as pediatric users grow, so do their leg lengths, right? I kind of mentioned this when we talked about our hip adductors earlier, but that growth can be concerning for anybody who has tonal patterns or adduction, internal rotations, things like that, because once your knees get past the front of that pad, the pad now becomes a fulcrum that can increase the torque on the hips, where dislocation is already a common issue. So remember from earlier, we've really got to consider those opposing forces that our corrections can have, not just when we deliver the chair, but as best as we can estimate for the life of that equipment, right? Francisco here, he is an 18-year-old muscular dystrophy user, and muscular dystrophy is one of a group of diseases that can cause progressive weakness and decrease in muscle mass, but symptoms are definitely going to vary depending on the type of muscular dystrophy we're looking at. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is most common, in which that progression is proximal to distal, right? So understanding where that muscular dystrophy originates and what portions of the body that are affected first, what happens as that progression continues, all of that's really imperative to make sure we're allowing that individual proper seating right out of the gate, and we're not just waiting until a need arises, and we're not just immediately jumping into full-blown custom, things like that. So regarding the lower extremities, Francisco has padded foot supports to actually protect the top of his feet here, as you can see, and he's got a calf panel to help keep them over the foot plate, to keep the feet over the foot plate. So notice we're definitely not trying to tug and pull and get those feet down like you would see a normal foot looking. We're just accommodating what he's got going on and ensuring he's comfortable here. Our friend Lyndon here has anoxic brain damage, scoliosis, arthrogryposis, among other things, and this is a great example of where, again, those ideal 90-90-90 rules, they just don't work in practice often. So you can see she's got a single side foot box and a custom support here to protect and support her lower extremities. There's no trying to correct or anything like that. We're just accommodating her needs without trying to tug and pull and strap her down into a position that would ultimately do a lot more harm than good for her. And then don't forget about foot driving. We have a gentleman here who's using a Movis foot control, and with this style of foot control, you use it and operate it by dorsal or plantar flexing the foot for forward and reverse, or you rotate medial lateral for steering. Now this means that the foot plate height needs to be pretty critical. It needs to be something where the user is able to rest on that device without triggering a command. Angle is critical, orientation is critical, depth is critical, right? Sounds pretty similar to foot plate placement, right? Having things in those neutral positions and allowing him to relax his entire leg and foot, just like you would with a standard foot plate, is critical for his safety and function with this drive control. But here we have a user who, this young lady's using a mushroom joystick to control her chair, and this mushroom's got a custom topper on it. So this is a little bit of a different movement pattern for driving the chair than the Movis device would require. In this case, she doesn't actually even use her foot plate while she's driving. So she's resting her foot on that joystick topper. A lot of times she's actually lifting her leg up and off of it. So we really just need to help her find that stability elsewhere and be safe and comfortable in that chair without locking her feet in necessarily. So before I open the floor for questions, I do want to remind everybody that I'm going to be sending out a PDF copy of this presentation for everybody who joined us, and I'll send this to the email that you used to register. That email should also have a link for a quiz. It should be hopefully a fairly simple quiz, short quiz for anybody who needs CECs. Unfortunately, we can't do CEUs because of the product focus that we do have on these webinars. But there's also going to be a link for just a general survey about the experience. I do want to make sure I'm not wasting anybody's time and I can improve it when and where I can. And we'll make this recording available for on-demand viewing as soon as possible, for sure within a couple of days. So with that, if there's any questions, feel free to type them in the chat if you do have them, and I'll try to get you answers. Aside from that, I do appreciate everybody taking time to join us. I hope you found it worthwhile. And don't forget, we do have another webinar coming up next month. Please register. We'll be taking a look at the Stealth TFB series of custom back supports, hopefully trying to simplify those for you guys. So I appreciate it, and I'll hang out here for a couple minutes for any questions. Aside from that, I appreciate your time, guys.